Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah that you find at the top of Daf Mem Aleph. Before we begin the actual text, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading which reads Tashlumim Shoinim, different payments. Chelik mehem mishalem al pi hoidaso. Some of them he will pay even if he happens to admit to guilt. The chelik mehem hamoide bohem poter, and some of them, when he admits to having sinned or having committed whatever, as a result of his confession, he will actually be exempt from the otherwise necessary payment. The Mishnah. Ha'omer pitisi es bito shel ploni. A person says, I seduced the daughter of so-and-so, and he mentions the name of the father. Mishalem boishes upagam al pi atzmoi. Based on his confession, he'll pay the boshes and pagam payments. The boshes is payment for the embarrassment, pagam for the depreciation. The ein mishalem knas, but the fine, the 50 shekel kesef payment, is not going to be paid since he admitted his wrongdoing. Before we continue, we glance at the top. The Eino Mishalim Knas, second line in Rashi, second line from the top. Bovakama, Nafgalon, in the tractate Bovakama, we learn that Moide B'Knas Potter, that one who confesses to having committed an act that would be chayav, that would be obligated, that would obligate one to pay knas, he is thereby exempt. Where is that learned from? Asher Yarshun Elohim, from that posuk, Prat L'Marshias Atzmo, where the Torah says someone who was sentenced, was condemned by the judges, indicating that only if the judges found him guilty would he have to pay, but if he implicated himself, he would not be guilty. We turn back to the Mishnah. Ha'omer gonafti. Person says, I committed a theft in a stealthful fashion. Mishalim es hakeren al pi atzmo. Based on his self-implication, he pays the principal. The ein mishalim teshlumei kefel v'teshlumei arba v'chamisha. But he doesn't pay the kefel, which is the additional payment. If the item is worth $10, standard kefel payment requirement would say you have to compensate the owner $20. But since he admitted on his own to having committed the geneva, he doesn't pay that extra amount, nor does he pay the multiple 4 or 5 time payment that would have had to been paid had he been condemned, had he been convicted by the courts as not only stealing but also slaughtering or selling the animal in question. But once he admits that he did that, that he stole and slaughtered it, or stole and sold the animal, he will be exempt, and all he has to pay is the principal. Hamis shori es ploni. A man confesses that his ox killed a person, and as a result of that, there's a payment that needs to be made called kofer, the kofer payment. So a person confesses that his ox killed so-and-so, shoro shel ploni, or that his animal killed someone else's animal, hareza mishalim al pi atzmo. He has to pay, he has to make those payments. This Mishnah is of the opinion that the kofer payment is a financial restitution as opposed to a fine. Hamis shori avdoi shel ploni. If a person says that my animal killed the slave of so-and-so, and the Torah says that for the death of a slave at the hands of someone's animal, or at the horns of someone's animal, you have to pay 30 shekel. That's a fixed Torah amount. It's called a knas. And therefore, ein mishalim al pi atzmo. He does not pay when upon his own confession. Zeh haklal, the following is the rule. Kol ha-mishalim yeser al ma shehizik. Eino mishalim al pi atzmo. Any type of payment that exceeds the market value of the either loss or damage, that kind of payment that exceeds the actual value, one would not pay if he confesses to having been guilty of it. The Gemara asks, Velisni onasni, why not teach about a person who comes forth and says, I raped so-and-so? The Torah mentions that for rape one has to pay 50 shekel kesef, 50 pieces of silver for committing a rape. That too is in the realm of a knas. And just like someone who confessed PTC on the first line of the Mishnah, he's exempt from the knas, that fixed 50 shekel sum. Why not have this featured also in the Mishnah? So the Gemara answers, you're right, it could have been in the Mishnah. Lo mibaya komar. The structure of the Mishnah is in the lo mibaya fashion. Lo mibaya means I don't have to tell you. Lo mibaya on nasti. I don't have to tell you that case where the lo kapogim law, where he's not, let's say, deprecating her, he's not insulting her by his having said, I raped her. There's no, let's say, creation of ill reputation of the girl, which is in stark distinction, contrast to the case of someone who says, I seduced the girl. When someone says, I seduced her, I mean she actually went along with the act willingly. That is quite embarrassing. But if a person says, I raped so-and-so, where there isn't pagam, the lo kopogim lo, the mishalem boishes upagam al piatzmo, where he has to pay the embarrassment amount and the pagam, the depreciation amount, based on his word, that's obvious. Avol PTC, but where he says, I seduce so-and-so, which is the case that the Mishnah featured, the kopogim law, by saying that he is deprecating her, he is vilifying her. Emo lo mishalem al piatzmo. Maybe in such a case where a person comes forth on his own with that information, we shouldn't believe him, because believing him is also at the expense of someone else. So, but by the fact that we, as the Mishnah teaches, we accept payment from him, that only strengthens what he is saying. So let's read that again in the Gemara. Maybe we shouldn't accept payment once he confesses, because that only strengthens his story, which ends up insulting and vilifying the girl. Kamash Malon, the Mishnah is Mechadesh, tells us the following novel point, that we do accept the boshis and pagam payment when a person confesses to having seduced, even though it in fact comes at the expense of someone else's good name. Masnisen delo ki haitana. The Mishnah that we learned is not in accordance with the following opinion. The Sanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yehuda, tells us in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Af boishes b'gam eino mishal mal pi atzmo. Even those payments, the payment for embarrassment and depreciation, he will not pay if he confesses that he seduced so-and-so. Lo kol heimenu sheyifgom bito shel ploni. It's not within his power to deprecate and vilify the daughter of so-and-so. A question. Omar le Rav Papa Abaye. And you'll notice we have a double-line series marking on the side of the Gemara. Under the Nosei Mivneh heading, a double underline is featured, highlighting the word Nicha. The Reb Shimon Dieno Mishalem Gam Boishes V'Gam Shal Mefuta Al Piatzmo. According to Reb Shimon, that in addition to the knas that he won't have to pay with his self-confession, so too the Boishes V'Gam payment he will not make. Kedei Shelo Livgoim Bo, so as not to vilify her. Mahadin im nicha lo says halas kedei lekabel tashum. What are you going to say is the law if she is willing to bear the insult and vilification simply to make some money, to get the money that ought to be paid? will Reb Shimon change his mind or view that case differently? So that's Rav Papa's question to Abai. Nicha loladi damai. What happens if she doesn't mind? It's all right for her that he says these things. At least she gets money out of it. The Gemara says that's not going to change the picture. Dilma lo nicha le lavia. Maybe it's not pleasing to her father, the story that this guy is telling about his having seduced the fellow's daughter. What about if her father is also willing and accepting of the story? Will he then will Rav Shimon say that then the offender has to pay? Dilma lo nichalu livnei mishpacha. It's still we won't accept payment from him. We won't expect him to pay because that still lends a bad name, reduces the reputation of the extended family. That within their family they have a relative that yielded to seduction. What about nichalahu livnei mishpachomai? What if her family doesn't mind? It's acceptable to them that the story is being told, and would Rav Shimon say the guy would then have to pay? The Gemara says no. It's impossible that there isn't some member of this family, they may be abroad, far away, but that finds this unpleasant. So, as far as Reb Shimon is concerned, we're just not going to heed the confession of someone who says, PTC as Vita Shemploni, not only with regard to the non-knas payment, but also with regard to the Boishas Gam, no payment, so as not to give any credence to his story. On the side of the Gemara, under the Nosei, the topic heading, we've written the following: Chatzi Nezek. Machlokes Amoroyim Ihave Momono Knas. Chatzi Nezek means half damage payment. An animal, let's feature the classic case of an ox. An ox that gores and creates, through the goring, creates damage, depreciation in the injured animal. The first time, the second time, the third time the animal gores, the payment that's made is called chatzi nezek, half payment. The fourth time that it happens, the owner will have to pay full damages. That's in a very general way of explaining the difference between chatzi nezek and nezek shalem, full damages. There are more relevant points of distinction that will come up in the course of the discussion in the Gemara. The topic, though, as we indicate here, is that type of payment, the chatzi nezek. Once again, you're not paying the actual value of the damage. You're paying half the value. So it's not a payment that corresponds to the actual damage that resulted. How do we view that? Is it viewed as a mamon type payment, a basic financial form of restitution, or is it a fine? What difference does it make how you classify it? So there's a very big difference, and that's exactly what the Mishnah was featuring, and that is if you come forth on your own with the information. If you come forth and say, my animal, which has been known to be a very docile animal, never gored, or maybe once or twice, if you come forth with the story that it gored, thereby raising the possibility of paying half damages, will you have to pay because you told the story? You weren't convicted or found guilty by a court. Do you have to pay chatzi nezek? Now we turn to the Gemara. Homer ganafti mishamis akeren v'chulei. The Mishnah went on to speak about the exemption of paying the kefel, the arba v'chamisha, the 4 or 5 times. Itmar palgo nisko. What about when it comes to the half payment, when a shor tam, when a non-goring type animal does in fact inflict damage. And as we said before, that damage is called palga. Palga in Aramaic is chatzi, half, nizka, half damage. Rav Papa palga nizka mamoina. According to Rav Papa, it's viewed as within the realm of standard financial restitution. Rav Huna braid Rav Yeshua Amar palga nizka knasa. The half payment is considered in the realm of knas, not mamon. In our previous shiur, we made a point that these are distinct, they're separate realms of halacha. The realm of knas versus the realm of mamon. So Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua, is of the opinion that palganis, the chatzi nezek, is a knas type payment. And here we go over the shitas. The Gemara elaborates on each shita. Rav Papa Amar palganizka mamona. The half payment is considered a financial restitution. Kosovar, Rav Papa is of the opinion, stam shvorem lav b'cheskas shimur kaimi. Your average ox is not to be viewed as a purely docile animal. Literally, it doesn't have the status of considered an animal under guard, meaning it's not to be expected of it that it will remain an innocent, non-threatening creature, but rather your stam shvarm, your basic average ox, is a damager, is a threat. Ubedinhu de meshalem kule, and technically, as soon as it imposes damage, it creates loss. The owner should pay the full amount. It's kind of like expected. This animal will cause damage. You should pay the full bill. V'rachmanu dechayas olei. The Torah, in saying that all you have to pay during the initial first 3 times that it damages, the Torah says you pay half. It's a function of chayas. Chayas has to do with the Torah's compassion and consideration. V'rachmanu dechayas olei dakati lo yayatura, because the animal hasn't proven itself, hasn't established itself in actuality as a goring animal. Ayayid, maybe the more familiar word is mu'ad. It is an animal that's established as a damaging creature. So that even though your basic animal is not viewed as purely docile and non-threatening, not so. It's a damaging type creature, but hasn't established itself as such until it gores 3 times. So up till that point, as a result of the Torah's compassion, you're getting off the hook by paying only half. But as we said, technically you should be paying the full amount, and that indicates, as Rav Papa says, that the chatzi nezek payment is really a momon type payment, a standard form of financial restitution. Rav Huna Rav Yeshua Amar palganizka knasa. Rav Huna comes from a totally opposite point of view, that the half damage that you have to pay is considered knas. Kosovar, he is of the opinion, stam shvar b'cheska shimur kami, your basic shor, even if it's left unguarded, is considered guarded, meaning it's considered docile and a non-threatening entity. Ubedin hu delo lishon klal, and in the event that the animal gores, you really shouldn't have to pay anything, because it's something so out of the ordinary, something so unexpected. The Torah moves in and says you've got to pay half damages. It's a fine, so as to motivate a person to watch his animal. As we said, according to Rav Papa, if one confesses that his as of yet short tam, non-goring animal imposed damage, you will have to pay, even though you confessed. Rav Huna says no. By virtue of the fact that you came forth on your own, and it wasn't the courts that sentenced you or convicted you on those grounds, you are off the hook. You admitted, you were moide b'knas, you admitted to a knas type payment. Siman hezek ma v'hemes klal. The siman, it's a mnemonic device in order to remember, let's say, the upcoming sugya. And this is all based on the fact we have a highly structured Gemara ahead of us. On the side, we have a mivneh, structural note, indicating that this continues till Amud Beis. The crown shape is featured here. These are nisyonos, these are attempts. Lehachriya b'machlokes im chatzi nezek knas o mamon. We're going to try to settle this argument between Rav Papa and Rav Huna bar Yeshua by citing sources attempting to show which opinion is more likely, is more correct. A triangle will figure also in our discussion. This is a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a vigorous give and take Gemara. The point facing up, nisayon lochiach shechatzi nezek mamon. If you see the triangle then inverted, ein hoichocha lekach, it's not conclusive. It doesn't prove that point. So, before we get into the Gemara text, it's advisable to just take a bird's eye view of the Gemara. The Gemara will be attempting several times. We have here 4 crown shapes indicating 4 attempts to try to prove one way. If you notice right after the source cited at number 1, there's a triangle with the point facing up. And on the side, we already demonstrated. We're going to try to show that chatzi nezek mamon. What happens in crown number 2? Likewise, right after the source that's cited, you see a triangle with the point facing up, an attempt to show that chatzi nezek is mamon. The same we see in case 3, and likewise in case 4, that immediately after the crown shape, we see a triangle point facing up, indicating chatzi nezek mamon. But as you can readily see, there are inverted triangles as well, where the attempt will be rejected. So now the Gemara text. Tanan, hanizik v'hamazik betashlumin. The Mishnah says, there in Maseches Bava Kama, that the nizik, the victim, the one who is damaged, and the mazik, the damager, are both participant in making the payment. What does that mean? They're both participant in making the payment. Well, to be a little more focused, in the case of chatzi nezek, where the half payment is the amount that needs to be paid, the Mishnah describes both the nizak and the mazik in participating in making that payment. Well, obviously the mazik, the owner of the damaging animal, he is paying out half damage. The nizik is also said to be paying. Now, what do we mean by that? So the Gemara goes on. Very well, according to the opinion that says that the half payment is a standard financial form of restitution. Hainu deshayich nizik betashlumin. With that, we understand that the nizak also is said to be, contributing to the payment. And what we mean by that is, according to the opinion that said chatzi nezek or palga nizka is mamon, if you go back to that point in the Gemara, it was where we had Rav Papa presenting his point of view. He said that your basic ox is something that you would expect to impose damages. And he said, technically speaking, the full amount should be paid. So technically speaking, the victim should have received the full amount. And he's not. It's as if he is forgiving on the half that he otherwise should have received. So with that approach, we understand that the nizak, the victim, is also considered paying out, in that he's foregoing half of the payments that he really should have received. According to the opinion, it said that the half payment is simply a fine, which meant technically speaking, the nizak should have received nothing. Hashta, the lav didei koshokel, now that he's receiving half, which is not his, meaning it's something he didn't have a right to expect, so to speak. It wasn't coming to him, so he's receiving a gift almost. He's something that wasn't coming to him. He's getting. But Tashlumin Isa, you're telling me that he is participant in paying out? How is that? He's getting a free check over here. Half payment that he had no right to expect at the outset even. So how can the source describe the nizak as being also participant in the paying out? What loss is he suffering? Nothing. He's getting something that he wouldn't have expected to receive at the outset. The Gemara answers in defense of this opinion that Chatzi Nezek is Knas. What does it mean betashlumin, that the nizak is betashlumin? Lo nitzrucha ela lepchas nevela. Can we give an example of this? So we have taken from the Rashi. We have on the side a little example. Imagine a live cow is worth $100. After it's killed, there's a carcass. The carcass that remains is worth $20. The total loss is $80. The chatzi nezek of that is $40. What does the mazik have to pay? $40. Now, there was a carcass in the story. The depreciation as a result of the damage was established at the point of actual damage. There oftentimes is a lapse, there's a gap in time between the actual damage and the eventual sale of the carcass. What's a person going to do with an animal carcass? He prefers selling it and at least get its value. By the time the carcass is sold, it may very well depreciate even further. So that a carcass that at the time of the damage was worth $20, by the time it's sold, it's worth $5. How much did the nizak, the victim, the owner of the dead animal, how much did he actually receive? He received $40. That's chatzi nezek, but at the same time there was additional depreciation that he's not getting compensated for whatsoever. That depreciation from a carcass worth $20 at the point of the animal's death to the $5 value that it was at the time that the carcass was sold, that the nizak loses out on. Oh, that's what we mean in the source that was quoted, that the nizak is betashlumin. So that from that standpoint, he is suffering a loss. But as far as the initial chatzi nezek that he received, that was a gift because of the opinion that says chatzi nezek knas, as we explained before. So now we have this Tanaic source quoted at the crown number 1, hanizak v'namazik betashlumin, and we explain what does the nizak betashlumin mean according to the opinion that chatzi nezek knas. It's a reference to pchas nevela, the additional depreciation of the animal carcass. The Gemara asks, pchas nevela tanina. We have another Tanaic source for that information. The other Tanaic source says, Tashlumei nezek melamed. Tashlumei nezek is a quote from the Pasuk in the Torah. And from the expression of I should actually say it's let me correct myself. It's a quote from a Mishnah in Bava Kama, Mishalim Tashlumei nezek b'nei meitav haaretz. That term, Tashlumei nezek, this teaches us that the owner of the dead animal, he is to take care of the carcass. That means eventually he will sell it and get whatever money he can from it, and that as we said before, if there's any depreciation from the point of the animal's death till its actual sale, he has to absorb that. So the concept of Pas Nevela is revealed in this other Tanaic source. So what do I need the original Hanizak V'Mazik V'Tashlumin for that purpose? The Gemara answers, Chada betam v'chada b'muad utzricha. I need to be taught this idea that the owner of the victimized animal has to absorb this loss, both in the case where it was damaged by a docile animal, a tam, or by a muad, by a known goring type animal. Utzricha means I need to be told in both cases that the owner of the victimized animal has to absorb that loss. The ashmeinan tam, had the Torah taught that in the case of tam, mishum dakati lo hayayid, damager, the threatening animal, hasn't established itself yet as a muad. That's the akati lo ayayid. Akati means it still hasn't become ayayid muad, and therefore we will go light on the owner and not expect him to compensate for any carcass depreciation. Avo muad, where the offending animal, the attacking animal, was a muad, and it's already been proven and demonstrated that it is a known goring animal. Amolo, I would have thought that in such a case we will charge the owner of such an animal. After all, he hasn't been very successful in watching his animals, so let him pay for the depreciation as well. So therefore, it's not enough for me to tell me about the attacking owner exemption just in the case of tam. The yashmin and muad, had I taught the exemption in the case of muad, the exemption of the owner compensating the victim for the carcass depreciation, mishum dekomashalim kule, basically the victim there is getting practically full compensation, and that's enough. It's enough that he gets full compensation from the original value of the animal to we'll say that difference between its original value and the value of the carcass at the time of its death. Avol tam emolo, but in the case of the tam that was responsible for the death of the cow, where the owner of the victimized animal is only getting half damages, maybe under those circumstances the attacking animal's owner should compensate for the carcass depreciation. Tzricha, therefore I have to tell you that in that case also, where all that he's paying out is chatzi nezek, the owner of the attacking animal is not responsible for any aspect of carcass depreciation. Toshma. We try again to settle the machlokis between Rav Pam, Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua regarding chatzi nezek. Is it knas or mamon? So we have this Tanaic source. It says ma bein tam lemuad. What is the difference between the tam payment and the muad payment? Shatam mishalim chatzi nezek migufo. The owner of the tam attacking animal will pay half damages, but only up to the value of the animal itself. Which would mean, for example, if imagine an animal valued at $100 kills an animal worth $1,000. Now the chatzi nezek there, just to keep things simple, is $500. The attacking animal was worth altogether just $100. So the payment of chatzi nezek migufo means you'll pay maximum half damages, but not an amount that will that will exceed the value of the animal itself. And in the case we gave, rather with a extreme discrepancy, the victim will receive not any more than $100 in compensation. So he's going to be losing a lot of money. Even in terms of the chatzi nezek, the chatzi nezek was valued in our example of $500. He's going to receive compensation of $100, and that's it. And muad mishale nezek shalem, the muad pays full damages. Minu aliyah. Minu aliyah means not based on the animal, the attacking animal's value, but from any property that the owner of the attacking animal may possess. All of that is subject to serving as compensation for the damage. So the Tanaic source we just read points out the difference between tam and muad. V'lo katani, it doesn't say in this source another difference. It doesn't say shatam that in the case of a tam damage, the owner, if he confesses, will be exempt. In the case of muad, he'll have to pay. That would be a very nice distinction, but the source doesn't say that. What does that show us then? That's not a point of distinction. That just like in the case of muad, he'll have to pay through based on his own confession, so too in the case of tam, he'll have to pay out. What does that indicate? That chatzi nezek is mamoin. So here we have crown number 2, initially trying to show chatzi nezek mamon. The Gemara tries to answer. It says, Tona v'shir. Listen, this source told us a difference between tam and muad. There are other differences. It just left, and it taught this difference that migufa versus minu aliyah, like we read, but it left out this out. It could have been taught, just it left it out. It was not an exhaustive list of differences. So that not only is the issue of migufo minu aliyah a difference, but also al pi atzmo, will he pay al pi atzmo, is also a point of difference. In the case of muad, he'll pay al pi atzmo. In the case of tam, he won't pay al pi atzmo, showing us that chatzi nezek is knas, and chatzi nezek, and knas, when one confesses it, is in fact exempt. Now, throughout the Shas, you find this kind of answer, that a source taught what it did, but it was not an exhaustive list. In order to answer such an answer, it's not enough that only one point was left out. If you want to say that a source represents a list of items and it taught one and left out others, that can be stated only if 2 or more points were left out. So therefore, the Gemara asks, "My shiur, the high shiur, what else was left out of this source to enable you to give this answer of Tona v'shir, that the source was simply incomplete?" The Gemara answers, "Shiur chatzi kofer." It left out this point called chatzi kofer. First of all, kofer is a payment made when a person's animal kills a Jew. And we say a Jew as opposed to killing a slave. Killing a Jew, if an animal, let's say a known goring animal kills a Jew, he has to pay the value of the dead victim. That payment is called kofer. This Tanaic source features the differences between tam and muad. So we said there are differences. One of the differences was stated in the source itself, migufo versus mi'aliyah. In order to defend Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua that chatzi nezek is knas, we have to say that also could have been taught that chatzi nezek will not be paid if the fellow confesses, and muad payment will be made if he confesses. What else was left out in order for us to be able to say that? This was left out, that if it's a tam that kills a Jew, he will not have to pay anything. That's what chatzi kofar. Chatzi literally means half kofar, meaning the tam will not pay chatzi kofar, won't pay anything, and the muad will have to pay kofar. The Gemara asks, mishum chatzi kofar. If you're going to rely on chatzi kofar as being, we'll say, the ultimate defense of Rav Huna's position, lav shiura hu. No, sorry, that's not considered an example of something that was left out of the list of distinctions. Ha money Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the source, and we're at the top of Omid Beis. We just reached the top of Omid Beis. This source that said Ma Bein Tam Lamud is authored by Rabbi Yossi Aglili Diomar Tam Mishalem Chatzi Kofar. In fact, the Tam does pay Chatzi Kofar, just like it pays Chatzi Nezek. In other words, when the source said in the original text Ma Bein Tam Lamud Shatam Mishalem Chatzi Nezek, included in that is the payment of Chatzi Kofar. So that the issue of Kofar is not an additional point of difference. So that at this point then the direction that crown number 2 has taken would be a direction where it's like say more comfortable to assume like Rav Papa. Because if you're going to learn like Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, and you want to say that the distinction between Al Pi Atzmo, yes, paying Al Pi Atzmo versus not paying Al Pi Atzmo, that in the case of Muad you'll pay Al Pi Atzmo, in the case of Tam not pay Al Pi Atzmo, that distinction, if you want it to have also been taught, you would have had to find something else that could have been taught as a distinction and also left out. We don't have an example of that at this point, making things a little difficult for Rav Huna Berger of Yeshua. We continue. Toshma, second line from the top of Mem Aleph Omid Beis. Hamish Shori as Ploni, O Shoiroi Shel Ploni. A person confesses that his ox killed somebody or killed someone's animal. Hareze mishalem al pi atzmo. He must pay. My lav betam. Is it not so that this is talking about a case of the tam animal, and the fact is that he has to pay on his own word? That means that it's not a knas, it's mamon, like Rav Papa. Lo, b'muad. This source is talking about a muad. A muad, everyone agrees, is a regular mamon payment. Therefore, if you confess that your animal killed some animals, you have to pay the full payment. Avol, betam mai. We ask if we were dealing with a tam, what would the halacha be according to the direction that you're trying to take in order to defend Rav Huna Rav Yeshua? You're going to have to say the tam would then would not pay al pi atzmo. Well, then we have a question. Aditoni seifa, instead of the seifa, the end of the source saying avdei shel ploni eino misham al pi atzmo, when the source wants to feature an exemption based on one's confession, it cites the case of someone confessing that one's animal killed someone's slave. In that case, so there's exemption. You confessed the slave payment was 30 shekel. We've learned that quite recently. And you're confessing that your animal committed a slave murder. So you don't have to pay. Instead of the Seifa teaching that, if Rav Huna Berger of Yeshua is correct, Nifloig v'nisni b'didah, stay within the realm of animal damages. Instead of going to the case of slave damages, stay within the realm of animal damages. Like when you're focusing on the victim, stay within the realm of animal victims and make a distinction as follows. When will you have to pay al pi atzmo based on your own confession, b'muad, if the animal that you own is a muad, a known damaging, established damaging creature? Avotam Eino Mishalem Al Pi Atzmo. If Rav Huna Rav Yeshua is correct, that's what it should have said. But if the animal that's the attacking animal is a tam, then you wouldn't have to pay Al Pi Atzmo. But the source doesn't teach that. Hence, that's a problem for Rav Huna Rav Yeshua. The Gemara answers in his defense, Kula Bemuad Kamairi. This source wasn't interested in featuring anything that had to do with a tam. It wanted to tell us all halachas regarding a muad animal and its damages. And if you're focusing not on the victim, so to speak, but you're focusing on the damager, and you want to show a distinction when even in the case of a muad there will be exemption, that is true only in the case of a person confessing that his muad animal killed someone's slave. So that as far as Rav Huna Rav Yeshua is concerned, it's true that if tam was the damaging creature and the person confessed that the tam imposed damage, he would be exempt. But that wasn't the agenda of this source. The agenda was to focus on a muad animal. Number 4, Tashma Zeh HaKlal. We learned this in our Mishnah. Kol HaMishalem Yeser Al Ma Shehizik Eino Mishalem Al Pi Atzmo. Any form of payment that exceeds the actual value of the damage, so that kind of payment one will not pay based on his own confession, on Al Pi Atzmo. What are we to learn from here? So we can make a diuk, we can infer. When is it that you don't pay Al Pi Atzmo? When the amount in question exceeds the actual value of the damage. If the amount is less than the actual damage, and you confess to that, you will have to pay based on your confession. What's an example of pachos mimash yizik? Obviously, the case of chatzi nezek. So a person says, my tam animal imposed damage on your creature. Well, you have to pay. That shows that chatzi nezek momon. If it were knas, you would be exempt. The Gemara answers in defense of Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, Loi Teimo, don't read the Mishnah as, don't make your inference as we did, Ha Pochos Mimash Yizik, that when it comes to having to pay, if it's Pochos you'll have to pay, Ela Ema, but when you read the source with its inference, you read as follows, Ha Kemo Shizik, Mishalem Al Pi Atzmo. The Mishnah teaches when the damage exceeds the value of the actual damage, and you confess to that, you won't have to pay that additional amount. However, if the payment is a payment only to the tune of what the value of the damage is, it matches the value of the damage, then you will have to pay Al Pi Atzmo. So that would then leave room for us to still think like Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, that if it were less than the actual market value of the damage, you would not have to pay because it's knas. So that leads us into a question now. The question lasts a couple of lines. Avol pachos mai. But if the amount that you'd be expected to pay is less than the actual value of the damage, what's the law going to be then? Eino mishalem al pi atzmo. Do you want to say that he won't have to pay? Listening then, grammatically or linguistically, the source, the Mishnah should have said Zeh haklal. The following is the rule: Kol she'eino mishalem kemo shehizik. Any type of payment that doesn't match the actual value of the damage, eino mishalem al pi atzmo. He wouldn't have to pay. By saying it that way, demashma pachos umashma yeser. That would include damages that are less, like chatzi nezek, or amounts that are more, that you wouldn't have to pay. But it doesn't say that. Tiyufta. This then results in our we'll say, refuting the opinion that Chatzi Nezek is Knas. Because as far as we're concerned, since the source didn't say Kemoshi Hizik, only then do you pay Al Piatzmo, but rather it said only if it's Yeser Al Mashi Hizik, you don't have to pay. But if it's Pachos Mi Mashi Hizik, like Chatzi Nezek, you will have to pay based on your confession. That's a problem for Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua. And now we have one of the biggest surprises in the Shas. And the Gemara rules that half Nezek payment is in fact Knas. The Gemara asks the most obvious question, you just refuted the position, and now you're ruling like that which you refuted? The Gemara says, you got it right there. You're not seeing double or your thing. That's right. That's exactly what we're saying. That the halach is Chatzi Nezek Knas. But we're not leaving it just like that. We're going to explain. Taimo Mai Itoisif. Why did the Gemara suggest a refutation? Or what exactly was the refutation? Mishum delo katoni kemoshi hizik. Because of the linguistic factor, because the Mishnah didn't read that any payment that's not equal to the actual market value of the damage, you don't have to pay al piatzmo. Lo psikole. It couldn't have read like that. In other words, the suggestion for the Mishnah to have said, as we saw just a couple lines up, stating a rule that if you're not paying an amount that matches the actual value, you would be exempt. That statement is not exact. It's lo psikole. There is a payment called Chatzi Nezek Tzroros. Chatzi Nezek, everyone knows by now, that means half payment. Tzroros is a reference to pebbles. As an animal walks along in its normal course of behavior, normal animal striding, let's imagine it's walking on a dirt road or on an unpaved surface. Pebbles will be cast forth from under the animal's feet, through the animal's weight, and plodding on stones. It thereby causes stones to be hurled at a distance, and those stones can cause damage. The Gemara adds the Hilchos Gemiri law. That payment is there's an oral tradition concerning that payment, the mamonahu. That's a mamon payment. It doesn't reflect the actual damage. If, let us say, an animal's walking along and a stone is cast out from underfoot and it breaks a $20 window pane, the halach is that the owner will have to pay $10. If the owner comes forth and says, my animal did that, he'll have to pay it. Because of what the Gemara just said, it's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. This is an oral tradition that's called a mamon payment. Therefore, the Mishnah could not have said that any payment that doesn't reflect the actual damage, and a person confesses it, he'll be exempt. Because there is this example. This is an example of a payment that doesn't reflect the actual damage, and you will have to pay based on your confession. Now that we've established that halacha, in other words, the Gemara ruled like Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua that Chatzi Nezek Knas. We have a double underline, one of our series markings on the side under the Mivneh heading, Sidra Shel Halachas Lefi Maskonas Gemara. There's a series of halachas. Now there are numerous details that the Gemara will reveal. So instead of us giving an introduction to the section, we'll just let the Gemara unfold. A series of halachas that result from this conclusion that Chatzi Nezek Knas. And if you remember when we introduced Rav Huna Bar Yeshua, that is a reflection of, we'll say, the unusual. The animal was expected to be docile. It was expected not to create any damage. If it did damage, so pay, and we said that's just to motivate the owner to watch it a little better. But it was something very unexpected. With that in mind, Hai Kalba de Ochal Imri, a dog that eats a sheep, V'shunur de Ochal Tarnagoli Ravavi, or a cat that eats a large chicken. Mishunehu, it's unusual. It's unusual, and we'll insist that the owner pays. He'll have to pay, we'll say, Chatzi Nezek, because of the idea that it's ein darko b'kach, it's something unusual. And Rashi gets into here when he presents this. He mentions a number of principles that are cited in Maseches Bava Kama. But for our purposes, you're dealing with a type of damage that's unusual, and expecting a person to pay that for that, to compensate for that, that falls into the realm of knas. It's not mamon. And as a result of it being classified as knas v'lo magvinon bebavel, we will not be able to collect, to charge the offender, to force him to pay that. The reason for that is that judgments concerning knas payments must be overseen by judges that received formal licensing for that. That's called smicha. And in Bavel, smicha was not granted. Smicha, this formal, say, rabbinic, in modern terms, they use the term ordination. We can refer to it, though, in this context as licensing for judging cases of knas. That formal smicha was not given, wasn't transmitted from Rav LeTalmud in Bavel. Therefore, those cases are not judged in Bavel. You need smuchin in order to judge it, and there is no smicha in Bavel. Avol Zutri, however, if you had, let's say, a cat eating a chick, something small, urche hu umagvin, that's normal. And if the neighbor's cat ate my little chicks, so the owner of the cat will have to pay, even in Bavel. The e tofas lo mafkinon mine. However, if, let us say, a victim, let's say someone's sheep was eaten by someone's dog, or someone's large rooster was eaten by someone's cat, and I'm upset that my rooster just got consumed by the neighbor's cat, and I grab compensation, I grab payment from the offender. Lo mafkinon mine. We, the court, will not take that away from him. I think my assumption here is that when we speak about the victim grabbing payment, he'll grab the chatzi nezek, the half damage value. If he grabs it in Bavel, we won't take it away. We won't restore it to the offending party. The E Omar, if the victim says, I realize in Bavel my case cannot be processed, Akbuli Zimnal Eretz Yisrael, I want to appear in Eretz Yisrael in front of a court to get compensation for the damages that your animal caused me. Makbi'in lay, then we will set a date, and we'll set up that appointment. The E lo ozil, if the offending party doesn't go, he doesn't cooperate, mishamtinon lay, then we will put him into excommunication. Beinkach ubeinkach mishamtinon lay. Rashi says, "Bein kach u'bein kach, bein sheroitze nizak leilech le'eretz Yisrael, bein she'eino rotzeh." Whether the nizak wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, or even if he doesn't, he's willing to, let's say, forego any chance of collecting payment. Even in that case, mishamtinon lei, we will put the mazik in cherem until he gets rid of the animal that is causing these damages. That's mishamtinon lei, damrinon lei. We excommunicate him and we tell him, solik hezekoch, get rid of your damaging creature. Rashi says, mishamtinon lei lamazik miha laharogo sukelu v'lasak hezekoch. He has to kill his dog. How politically incorrect that might sound, but the halacha is a stronger factor than political correctness. If you will, he'll have to put his dog to sleep. That might sound a little better to sensitive ears, but that must be done. We cannot tolerate damaging creatures walking around in our midst. And this idea of Mishamtinon le Damrin le Solik Hazekha Mida Rabbi Nosson, it's based on Rabbi Nosson's teaching, the son Rabbi Nosson Omer. Minayin Shelo Yigadel Odin Kelev Rabasov Besa. From where do we know that a person should not raise a ferocious dog in his home? Nor should he set up a shaky ladder. It's quite dangerous in his home. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'lo sosim domim b'veisecha." Do not place literally blood, which would mean something would cause blood to flow. Do not have that b'veisecha in your house. So one is expected, and you can see, of course, the Talmudic sensitivity to public safety and how far we go in trying to ensure that. And you can see with that we conclude the third parak of Kesubos, and now the Mishnah introducing the fourth parak. Na'ara shenispatata, a girl that was seduced. Boishasa ufgama uknosa shalavia. The father of the girl is entitled to collect the boshes payment, the payment for the embarrassment, the depreciation value, and the knas, the 50 shekel kesef. All those payments, they go to the father. Vatsar betfusa. The word tfusa is a word based on a word found in the Chumash, but for our purposes it means a rape case. In the case of rape, a tsar payment is also made. In addition to boishes and pagam and the knas, there's also tsar, but that's only in the case of the anusa. That tsar payment is not made in the case of mefuta. This is information we have learned already. We have a double underline marking to highlight the expression omda bedin. And you'll see how we use that in the course of the Mishnah. Omda bedin, the case was brought to court ad shelo meis ha'av, while the father was still alive. Harei hein shelav, these payments go to the father. Meis ha'av, harei hein shel ochin. Once the father dies, since the case was tried when the father was alive, and the court ruled that payment must be made, but until the payment was made, the father died. So, harei hein shel achin, the obligation to pay is then, or the payment is then made to the brothers. So, in halachic terms, we say that since there was Hamoda Bedin, the father was Zoche, the father is said to have acquired it, even though it wasn't put into his pocket, but the court ruling is tantamount to the father receiving the money, and things that the father owned are then inherited upon his demise, inherited by his sons. Lo hispiko lamod b'din ad shemesav, if the case was not brought to the court in the father's lifetime. Rather, the father died before the case of the seduction was tried. And then it's tried. Harei hein shel atzmo, the girl herself will collect the payments. On the bedin ad shelo bogra, a case of seduction was brought to court before the girl reached 12 and a half years of age. Harei hein shel av, the payments are made to the father. Mei so'av, if the father dies, harei hein shalachim. As we said before, the hamoda bedin, the appearance in court, and the court's, we'll say the court's decision is tantamount to having the father acquire the payment, even though physically he didn't put it into his pocket yet. He died, so the children, the sons, are able to inherit. We didn't mention this before, but as far as the laws of inheritance are concerned, a man's sons inherit, not his daughters. There are other provisions that are made for female descendants, but not basic inheritance. Of course, when there are brothers that are present. So the Mishnah goes on. Lo hispiko lamoid bedin ad shebogra. The case wasn't brought to the court. The case of the seduction wasn't brought to court while she was still a nara, but rather things were delayed until she crossed the 12 and a half age mark. She became a bogeres. Harei hein shel atzma. The payment, when made, then will be paid to her. Rabbi Shimon Omer imlo hispika ligvois ad shemeis ho'av. Now here we dashed on the word ligvos. Ligvos means the actual collection. If there wasn't actual physical collection by the father, but rather collection was not made until the father died. So in terms of order of events, the father was alive for the Hamodah Bedin and for the court's ruling, but the father didn't collect the money physically. He first died. And then payment is made according to Reb Shimon, Harei hein shel atzma. The girl will collect it, and it won't be considered. It's not considered inheritance for her brothers, for her father's sons to inherit. So you see a machlokas tanoim. At what point does owed money become something subject to inheritance, to being inherited? We continue at the top of Mem Beis Omer Aleph. Maisa Yodel Mitziasa, income that the girl produced while her father was alive. That's Maisa Yodel. And Mitziasa, items she finds. Afal pi shelo gofsa, even if she didn't actually collect the wages that were due to her. Mei so'av, and the father died before the daughter collected those wages. Harei hein shel achin, her brothers inherit that amount. The Rashi on the second line from the top says Mei so'av harehu shel achin. The mishaboli olam, once her work production is done, it's come to the world, zocha boy ha'av, the father is said to become the owner of it. He has the rights to it. V'lo domi leknas. It's not similar to the knas payment. The lo havi momonat she'omad bedin veiduhu. A knas payment doesn't become momon until there's a court appearance and there's testimony over the matter. Because when it comes to knas, it's a type of thing that if the perpetrator himself, if the offender himself would confess to it, it wouldn't be paid at all. The Gemara. My Hamashmalon, what is this Mishnah revealing that I don't know already? Tanina, we've learned this elsewhere. On Daf Lametes, the Tanaic source said, Hamefate, we saw the Mishnah on Lametes, Hamefate, noisein shloisha dvar v'oines arba. The seducer pays 3 kinds of payment, and the rapist adds 1 more. Hamefate noisein boishes ubgam knas. The seducer pays those 3 kinds of payment. Moisif olav oines shenoisenes atzar. The rapist adds a tsar payment as well. So that's exactly what our Mishnah says, but we've already learned this, so we don't have redundancy or replicate Mishnayos. The Gemara answers, Li'aviha itzderich lei. The fact that the money is paid to her father, not that there exist the payments, but to whom is the money paid, that's what our Mishnah reveals. The Gemara asks, Lo v'yonami pshita. As far as the money being paid to her father, that's also obvious. Midakiyohiv mefate, from the fact that a seducer is expected to pay. The ilatzma, if you would think that the payment goes to the girl, why should a seducer pay anything? Midaita avad. She was willing. She agreed. She yielded to his seduction. Why should he have to pay to something she agreed to do? So the idea that the father is the receiver of the payments, that's obvious from the fact that a mefata pays anything. The Gemara. So what does our Mishnah reveal? What's the point of having our Mishnah? Answer: Omda bedin itzdirichalei plukta de Reb Shimon v'Rabbanan. The Mishnah introduces the factor of having appeared in court where the case was tried and then the father died. Who receives the payment at that point? That was a machlokas Reb Shimon and Rabbanan, and that's what our Mishnah revealed. According to the Rabbanan, in that case the brothers inherit the payment, and according to Reb Shimon, it's not considered mammon until the father would have actually collected it. And I don't think we emphasized this enough before. We saw Rashi point out amongst the payments that we're talking about, we're also talking about the knas, and the knas is not considered mammon until a certain point in time. We saw this in Rashi, and we can say it now as well. The knas and the other payments as well. It's not like the Maisi Adayim. Maisi Adayim, we said that once she does it, it becomes like the father's. But as far as these other payments are concerned, certainly the knas payment, it's not considered something subject to inheritance until a certain later point in time. Not as a result of the action having taken place, but either hamada b'din, according to the Rabbanan, or actual collection, according to Rabbi Shimon. So that is the point of having our Mishnah, to feature that machlokes.